On a cool winter's afternoon, the family and friends of Jesse Bird are gathering to say goodbye. Jesse is one of the latest Army veterans to die by suicide.
I feel like any minute now I'm going to wake up and find this is just a tragic dream.
I will be reading this on behalf of Brendan. Not only was Jesse my big brother, he was also one of my best friends. He always acted as my protector, even though he was such a gentle giant at times.
After returning from Afghanistan, Jesse Bird battled the night terrors and anxiety of his post-traumatic stress disorder. But his family believes it was his fight against the Department of Veterans Affairs that drove him to despair.
Jesse fought for his country. He fought for every single Australian. But his government returned favour by deserting him. We cannot let the Department of Veteran Affairs get away with this terrible injustice.
In 2007, Jesse joined the Army as an infantry soldier with Townsville's 1 RAR battalion. 2 years later, he was on the front line of Uruzgan province in Afghanistan to fend off the resurgent Taliban.
He was going there to help maintain the safety and security of people who lived in those villages.
Jesse's patrols were in challenging terrain, where he was in constant danger from gunfire and bomb blasts.
24/7 wherever you moved. The fact that if you, as a foot soldier or if you were moving around in a troop carrier, that at any time you could be blown up.
Jesse had only been in Afghanistan for a few weeks when his mate, Private Benjamin Renato, was killed by a roadside bomb.
I think Benny's death has been in part of Jesse's consciousness.
In 2010, Jesse returned to Townsville a changed man, and his life began spiralling out of control.
You could tell that there was something terribly wrong with him regarding his time in Afghanistan. The first week he came home, we were in Townsville with him, and he was drowning his sorrows.
Jesse tried to readjust to Army life back in Australia, but his growing mental anguish made it impossible. In 2012, he reluctantly quit and moved to Melbourne, where he was closer to his sister.
It wasn't until he moved to Melbourne, where I am, and we got to spend some time together, that I guess I came to terms with what had been going on in his life when he was in the Army.
Jesse couldn't hold down a job and relied on his parents for financial support.
Getting out of bed, going to sleep, cooking a meal, that kind of lack of motivation. And, for so long in the Army, he had something to live for.
He would reply to me if I asked how he was. He'd say things like shit or not good, and that's all he would reply, which would make me really concerned.
The Army has long known about Jesse Bird's suffering. A Defence OH&S report from 2010 states, Private Bird has been exposed to psychological trauma, requires debrief by a mental health specialist, and calls for him to be continually monitored.
You can use all the words extremely let down, angry, frustrated, but my son's gone now. We recognised that he was in danger.
Look, to be honest with you, he was, a shell of the man that I used to know while we served together.
Jesse reached out to veterans advocate John McNeil to lodge a compensation claim. In August 2016, the Department of Veterans Affairs accepted initial liability, but there were many hurdles to clear before financial support would begin.
The department like to have seen that you've exhausted all means of recovery, and And that would mean attending a post-traumatic stress disorder course, which teaches you how to deal with your PTSD, the signs and symptoms and coping mechanisms with that.
Jesse set about meeting DVA's many requirements, including driving to Geelong each week for the PTSD course, but it wasn't working. By November, his family was desperate, writing to a Senate inquiry into veterans' suicide.
Putting in that submission, surely the amount of other submissions, and with Jesse's submission, surely someone would have to listen. Someone would have to acknowledge what was going on. Wasn't the case.
John McNeil pleaded with DVA to start interim payments to ease the pressure.
I also informed DVA that I was concerned for Jesse's well-being and his mental health. They actually accused me of trying to use emotional blackmail to win one of my cases, and I pleaded with them that that was not the case. I was concerned and something needed to be done.
The department rejected Jesse's claim for PTSD, major depressive disorder and alcohol abuse based on psychiatric advice, which found his condition wasn't severe or stable.
The date on the letter is the 8th of May. It's a rejection letter to his claim for permanent compensation for impairment, and he was so upset and so angry. Don't you think, Jesse?
Yeah, he was sort of total resignation in his voice that he'd done all this work and it had been rejected.
7 weeks after that rejection, Jesse Bird was alone in his Melbourne apartment. He put on his army jumper, laid out his medals, and ended his life.
He had his rejection papers prominently displayed, along with a lot of other paperwork that he'd had to endure with the DVA.
He was my firstborn son. I don't have him anymore. And it's been painful to watch 7 years of him struggling with his mental illness. As a family, it has devastated us all. He's going to be sadly missed.
We're here to, I guess, following Jesse's funeral in Melbourne, which was a devastating, sad affair. We want this to be a celebration of his life.
On the weekend, a memorial was held on the Gold Coast to honour Jesse. But before the service even began, there was distressing news.
Since Jesse took his life on the 27th of June, due to his suffering with PTSD, supposedly three more veterans have taken their lives, with one young man taking his life overnight.
The Bird family doesn't want any sympathy. What they're calling for is lasting change to protect other veterans.
Thank you for being here to celebrate Jesse's extraordinary life. And please join with me and put your hands together in honour of Jesse Stephen Bird.
The Minister for Veterans Affairs, Dan Tehan, was unavailable for interview. In a statement, he told 7:30 he's ordered a review of Jesse Bird's case and will meet his family.
We want to have his rejection claim overturned, just to vindicate his stand, because his death, he staged it as a protest. And so we have a duty to carry on that protest.
We sincerely hope, and I look you in the eye and say this, that there is no other veteran family that has to go through this week, this month, next year, ever again.